Amen.
And welcome to, what are we, week 8? Welcome to week 8 in our semester. We're still studying major prophets. Yes, sir, that's the one. One of my students held up major prophet brochure that we're using. Got a good timeline in it. We're going to talk about a timeline later today. May not agree 100% with this, but I think you'll find that I noticed that Doc has got a fine publication over here that I've been familiar with for a number of years called Bible Timelines.
Oh, yeah.
It's
That is Gracious.
That's
not
Grace's
Doc.
book.
Miss Grace's book. Okay.
Get that right. She even lets me use it once in a while.
When you open it up, it's wonderful because it's got
Set him straight.
all those things we studied about in a little compressed short timeline. Only it's got stretched way out here, and you can read all the stuff that happened in between.
Yeah.
And toward the end of the lesson today, we'll get into a timeline that I think you'll appreciate, because Jeremiah quite often in these writings did not write things in order. He wrote them in order, but they didn't get presented, they didn't get numbered in order. Okay? There are things that we're going to read today that some of them pertained before the captivity, some of them pertained after the captivity. And usually he will announce approximately what was going on at the time that he wrote that chapter. But if you study in Jeremiah, you got to understand he wasn't like Isaiah. Isaiah went one block at a time as he went. Jeremiah did that pretty much in the first part, but the later it got into that, he'd go back and he'd remember something, he'd have to write it again to write some more onto it. And I see Jeremiah as a little skinny guy that was just very busy all the time, trying to get God's people together, get them organized, and teach them to do right in the name of the Lord. What Pastor Mullins was talking about in our last class, going out and ministering to the people. And we have to do that yet today. And I don't know if we had to write a book, if we could do it as well as Jeremiah did. You think about back in those days, things were pretty primitive, what they had to write with. And Jeremiah had a scribe with him. His name was Baruch. And Baruch did all his writing. And there's one chapter here that's dedicated to him. And we were finishing up chapter 40, 41 last week, and I really had hoped we'd get all the way to 45 last week. We didn't make it, so today we're gonna try to get through these. There's a lot of things in here that we've already seen. They've already been predicted at one time or another. They've already been prophesied one time or another, but it goes back over, and we'll just kind of move right on through them. So you'll see from time to time we'll skip a number of verses. I have here, like chapter 40, Gedaliah was made the governor over Judah. When did this happen? Well, it happened when the second captivity was going on, and they were taking the people out. And when Jeremiah was thrown in prison, okay? And Gedaliah was made the governor. He didn't stay the governor very long. They assassinated him, his own people. But it says, the captain of the guard took Jeremiah and said unto him, the Lord thy God hath pronounced this evil upon this place. And he jumped up to verse 5. It says, now while he was not yet gone back, he said, go back also to Gedaliah the son of Ahikam, the son of Shaphan, whom the king of Babylon hath made governor over the cities of Judah, and dwell with him among the people. It says, Jeremiah, go stick with this king. He's going to protect you. He's going to feed you. He's going to take care of you. And it says, go wheresoever it seemeth convenient unto thee to go. So the captain of the guard gave him victuals and a reward, and let him go. Gave him some food and some money, and told him to go get with Gedaliah, which in verse 6 we see, then went Jeremiah unto Gedaliah, the son of Ahikam, to Mizpah. Mizpah, I don't know if you remember from our map, but it wasn't real far from Jerusalem, but it was where the center of the government of Judah was at that time. Okay. And dwelt with him among the people that were left in the land. Chapter 41, Gedaliah was assassinated, and the remnant prepares to go to Egypt because they're fear of the Chaldeans. Who are the Chaldeans? Do you remember? We'll get a little bit more of this as we get.
Weren't they a tribe outside of the city of Israel? You say they were a outskirting tribe?
Chaldeans is kind of a broad way of calling people, because it seems like when somebody take over, they'd change their name, changed a little bit. But you had Assyrians, Babylonians. Those people, they're all Chaldeans, okay, for all practical purposes. Okay. So where's the country of Chaldea? Well, Assyria and Babylon, up in that area. You know, they weren't defined politically for very long as one or the other. Okay, so just to put them in something that's kind of easy to remember, if you remember that area up in Mesopotamia that went along from Ur of the Chaldees and moved up towards the top of the Mediterranean Sea. Actually went above it, just a little bit up in there, all the way from the Gulf of Arabia to up above the Mediterranean, I guess we could say, in that area. If you look in if you still have your book from our last semester, you got your books with your maps, and if you know where you can find Babylon, where is Babylon?
There.
Okay.
There.
Right up above the top. He's holding up this map.
Oh, you got it.
Called Journeys of the Apostles, and I don't know if you can see it at home here. But it's the map, that's the big yellow map that I'm trying to get centered here, and you look clear up the top of the map up here. Okay, and the Babylonians and Assyrians were over in this area. Okay, that's about as much as you really need to know about them for the purposes of this little palaver that we're doing here. But in chapter 41, we find Gedaliah got assassinated. It said, Jeremiah 41, verse 2, then arose Ishmael, the son of Nethaniah, and the 10 men that were with him, and smote Gedaliah, the son of Ahikam, the son of Shaphan, with the sword, and slew him whom the king of Babylon had made governor over the land. I'll tell you what, these people just would not be content, would they? And verse 16, we jump up to 16, he says, then took Johanan, the son of Kareah, and all the captains of the forces that were with him, all the remnant of the people whom he had recovered from Ishmael, the son of Nethaniah, from Mizpah. After that he had slain Gedaliah, the son of Ahikam, even mighty men of war, and the women, and the children, and the eunuchs, whom he had brought again from Gibeon. 17, he says, and they departed and dwelt in the habitat of Chimham, which is by Bethlehem, to go to enter into Egypt. In other words, they moved down by Bethlehem and gathered themselves together, got ready to make the trip down to Egypt, which Egypt wasn't very far from Jerusalem, was it? I mean, you think of what, 30 miles or something like that. Just a short trip, 30, 40 miles over there. But he said, because of the Chaldeans, for they were afraid of them, because Ishmael, the son of Nethaniah, had slain Gedaliah, the son of Ahikam, whom the king of Babylon had made governor over the land. So they were also afraid for the fact that these people had killed this king, and that the king of Babylon was going to be mad because that was one of his men. Okay, and he was. We find out later. Halley's Bible Handbook gave us these comments. He says, the remnant, fearing reprisal by Nebuchadnezzar for the slaying of Gedaliah, fled to Egypt, though explicitly warned of God that it would mean extinction. God warned them that they're going to get killed off if they go down, floating themselves down into Egypt again. Jeremiah 42:2, and said unto Jeremiah the prophet, let we beseech thee, our supplication be accepted before thee, and pray for us unto the Lord thy God, even for all this remnant, for we are left but a few of many, as thine eyes do behold us. Verse 9, he says, and said unto them, thus saith the Lord, the God of Israel, unto whom you sent me to present your supplication before him, if you will still abide in this land, then will I build you and not pull you down, and I will plant you and not pluck you up, for I repent me of the evil that I've done unto you. God says, just stay put, folks. I'm going to take care of you. Verse 15, and now therefore hear the word of the Lord, you remnant of Judah. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, if you wholly set your faces to enter into Egypt and go sojourn there, then it shall come to pass that the sword which you feared shall overtake thee there in the land of Egypt, and the famine whereof you were afraid shall follow close after you there in Egypt, and there ye shall die. Jump up 19. The Lord hath said concerning you, O ye remnant of Judah, go ye not into Egypt. Know certainly that I have admonished you this day. Verse 22, now therefore know certainly that ye shall die by the sword, by the famine, and by the pestilence in the place whither ye desire to go and to sojourn. Another comment from Halley's, and it's talking about into chapter 43, verses 8 through 15. It's talking about a city called Tahpanhes, which is in Egypt. It says its site has been identified about 10 miles west of the Suez Canal. You remember where the Suez Canal was when we talked about it?
It was the canal that went between the two.
Went all the way down to the Red Sea. It goes down to the Red Sea from the Mediterranean. Okay, there's a lake up there on the Mediterranean, right in that part of Egypt, up in above the Atlantic Ocean there, and it travels right down along the side of the Atlantic Ocean and all the way down in. And he says Suez Canal, that's a modern thing. That didn't exist until 1859 when they started building it, okay? So back in these days, they didn't know what Suez Canal was, but he's using this as a landmark because we may be familiar with the map, okay? In 1886, Sir Flinders Petrie uncovered the ruins of a large castle in front of which was a great open platform of brickwork, the very place Petrie believed where Jeremiah hid the stones. Also, Nebuchadnezzar's annals state that he did invade Egypt in 568 BC, which was 18 years after Jeremiah uttered the prophecy that he would. In chapter 43 and verse 10, he says, 3 of Nebuchadnezzar's inscriptions have been found near Tahpanhes. Okay. Jeremiah 43, verse 5. But Johanan the son of Kareah and all the captains of the forces took all the remnant of Judah that were returned from all nations, whither they had been driven to dwell in the land of Judah. 43 verse 6, even men and women and children, the king's daughters, and every person that Nebuzaradan, the captain of the guard, had left with Gedaliah the son of Ahikam, the son of Shaphan, and Jeremiah the prophet, and Baruch the son of Neriah. See, Baruch went everywhere that Jeremiah went.
Okay.
Kind of like Luke went everywhere that Paul went. Jeremiah 43, verse 7, it says, so they came into the land of Egypt, for they obeyed not the voice of the Lord. Thus they came even to Tahpanhes. Verse 9, he says, take great stones in thy hand and hide them in the clay in the brick kiln, which is at the entry of Pharaoh's house in Tahpanhes, in the sight of the men of Judah. In Jeremiah 43:10, it says, and say unto them, thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, behold, I will send and take Nebuchadnezzar the king of Babylon, my servant, and will set his throne upon these stones that I have hid, and he shall spread his royal pavilion over them. Kind of tells me that Nebuchadnezzar is planning on going to Egypt, doesn't it? In chapter 44, Halley's made another comment about Jeremiah's final appeal. He says, this last effort to induce them to abandon their idolatry failed. They were defiant. The queen of heaven was Ashtoreth, whose worship was with acts of immorality, in this case with their husband's consent. The place and manner of Jeremiah's death are not known. One tradition is that he was stoned to death in Egypt. Another is that he was taken from Egypt by Nebuchadnezzar with Baruch to Babylon and died there. So you see, that was in the in chapter 44, and we're not to the end of Jeremiah yet, but yet they're telling of his death here. Jeremiah 44:1 says, the word that came to Jeremiah concerning all the Jews which dwell in the land of Egypt, which dwell at Migdol and at Tahpanhes and at Noph and the country of Pathros, saying, and it goes to verse 4, howbeit I sent unto you all my servants, the prophets, rising early and sending them, saying, oh, do not this abominable thing that I hate. They're down there getting ready to worship idols again. It's Ashtoreth. Verse 13, he says, for I will punish them that dwell in the land of Egypt, as I punished Jerusalem by the sword, by famine, and by pestilence. Verse 14, so that none of the remnant of Judah, which are gone into the land of Egypt to sojourn there, shall escape or remain, that they should return into the land of Judah, to the which they have a desire to return to dwell there, for none shall return, but such as shall escape. Okay. Go to verse 17. It says, but we will certainly do whatsoever thing goeth forth out of our own mouth, to burn incense unto the Queen of Heaven. Now notice this sounds like an act of defiance. Well, it is. But listen to it. He says, but we will certainly do whatsoever thing goeth forth out of our own mouth, to burn incense unto the Queen of Heaven. That's this Ashtoreth they're talking about. And pour out drink offerings unto her, as we have done, we and our fathers, our kings and our princes, in the cities of Judah and in the streets of Jerusalem. For then we had plenty of victuals, and were well, and saw no evil. It's only because God was taking care of them. Verse 27, behold, I will watch over them for evil and not for good, and all the men of Judah that are in the land of Egypt shall be consumed by the sword and by famine, until there be an end to them. Chapter 45. Comment from Halley's. It says, Baruch, Jeremiah's scribe, was a man of prominence and high ambitions, who was recognized as having great influence with Jeremiah. And Jeremiah 45:1 says, the word that Jeremiah the prophet spoke unto Baruch the son of Neriah, when he had written those words in a book at the mouth of Jeremiah in the 4th year of Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, king of Judah, saying. Now, before we get into verse 2, we have a comment from John Gill here. It says, in the 4th year of Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, king of Judah, which was 18 years before the destruction of Jerusalem. See, he stepped back here in time. So that this prophecy does not stand in order, which would more properly we have followed the 36th chapter, where we have an account of what Baruch wrote from the mouth of Jeremiah in a roll, and read to the people, and after that to the princes, which exposed him to danger and caused the grief expressed by him in this chapter. But it is being written to a private person, and is postponed to this place. Okay, so Jeremiah 45, verse 2 says, thus saith the Lord God of Israel unto thee, O Baruch, thou didst say, woe is me now, for the Lord hath added grief to my sorrow. I fainted in my sighing, and I find no rest. Thus shalt thou say unto him, the Lord saith thus, behold, that which I have built will I break down, and that which I have planted will I pluck up, even this whole land. And seekest thou great things for thyself? Seek them not. For behold, I will bring evil upon all flesh, saith the Lord, but thy life will I give unto thee for a prey in all places whither thou goest. Now we're caught up to the start of this week's lesson.
All right.
Today we're going to cover Jeremiah chapter 46 through 52 and Lamentations 1 through 5. So we're going to finish Jeremiah's writings today. Whatever we don't finish, we're going to have to move on beyond it. So we'll try to hurry here. Jeremiah chapter 46, comment from Halley's. Again, it says a description of the defeat of the Egyptian army at Karkemish in 605 BC. Look at your timelines. In the middle period of Jeremiah's life, in verses 1 through 12, it says in a later prophecy that Nebuchadnezzar would invade Egypt, verses 13 through 26, which is an expansion of 43, 8 through 13, which see. It says over 100 years earlier, Isaiah had prophesied Assyrian invasions of Egypt. It says Isaiah, now remember, over 100 years earlier, Isaiah had prophesied Assyrian invasions of Egypt in Isaiah chapters 18 through 20. Okay, chapter 46, verse 2. Against Egypt, against the army of Pharaoh Necho, king of Egypt, which was by the river Euphrates and Karkemish, which Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, smote in the 4th year of Jehoiakim, the son of Josiah, king of Judah. For this is the day of the Lord God of hosts, a day of vengeance, that he may avenge him of his adversaries, and the sword shall devour, and it shall be satiate and made drunk with their blood. For the Lord of hosts hath a sacrifice in the north country by the river Euphrates. Verse 13, the word that the Lord spake to Jeremiah the prophet, how Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, should come and smite the land of Egypt. This first time I think that we see the word Nebuchadnezzar instead of Nebuchadnezzar. Just remember they're the same guy. It's just a difference in the translator's spelling. Okay? And it said in verse 25, the Lord of hosts, the king of Israel, saith, behold, I will punish the multitude of No and Pharaoh and Egypt with their gods and their kings, even Pharaoh and all them that trust in him. And verse 28, fear thou not, O Jacob, my servant, saith the Lord, for I am with thee, for I will make a full end of all the nations whither I have driven thee, but I will not make a full end of thee, but correct thee in measure. Yet will I not leave thee wholly unpunished. He says, I'm still punishing you folks, but I'm going to kill off all of these bad guys. I don't know if you caught that, but that's what he's saying here. He said, I'm using them to punish you, but I'm going to kill them all. Chapter 47, how he comments on the Philistines. Do you remember where Philistia was? Philistia was the country that went from the edge of Egypt down there where the Suez Canal is, went all the way up that coast of the Mediterranean. So you got up to about where Samaria is. Okay. And then you had Samaria and you had Galilee, right? Okay. So this is chapter 46 is a description of the defeat of the Egyptian army at Karkemish in the middle period of Jeremiah's life, and a later prophecy that Nebuchadnezzar would invade Egypt, which is an expansion of 48, 8 through 13. We already covered that. But we get down to verse 16. He says, so the word of the Lord spake to Jeremiah the prophet, how Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, should come and smite the land of Egypt. Verse 25, the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, saith, behold, I will punish the multitude of No and Pharaoh and Egypt. And we just read this. Go to verse 28, it says, fear thou not, O Jacob, my servant, saith the Lord, for I am with thee, for I will make a full end of all the nations whither I have driven thee. Notice that? It said, I will make a full end of all the nations whither I have driven thee, but I will not make a full end of thee, but correct thee in measure. Yet will I not leave thee wholly unpunished. The punishment isn't over. Okay. Chapter 47 is prophecy foretelling the desolation of Philistia by Babylon was fulfilled 20 years later when Nebuchadnezzar took Judah. Okay. Philistia was just to the left, just to the west of Judah, just to the left of Judah if you're looking at the map. Okay. when Babylon came through there, it says, well, we're just going to kill them all. We're going to take it over. It doesn't matter what they call themselves. Other prophets who paid their respects to the Philistines were Isaiah, Amos, Ezekiel, and Zephaniah, and Zechariah. Chapter 47, verse 4 says, because the day that cometh to spoil all the Philistines and cut off from Tyrus and Sidon every helper that remaineth. Now, we're Tyre and Sidon. Tyre and Sidon. Remember, we're way up in Israel, way up to the west side of Galilee, where Jesus grew up. Way up there, up above there. Okay? So it says, every helper that remaineth, and the Lord will spoil the Philistines, the remnant of the country of Caphtor. Jeremiah 47:7, how can it be quiet, seeing the Lord hath given it a charge against Ashkelon and against the seashore? There hath he appointed it. And Hallease makes a comment here on chapter 48, talking about Moab. Does everybody remember where Moab was? Where John the Baptist grew up, okay? Down there, you go to the Dead Sea and you take a right, okay? And you'll be right at the top end of Moab.
Wow.
It's a little brown country on the map. I don't know if Doc's got a map there he can show you. That one that we looked at a while back.
Just the one in the book.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
let's-
the maps are down there, but you'd have to set them up.
No, that's okay. Don't worry about it. It's just a small country there, okay? Moab was to the east side of the Dead Sea, okay? Just a small country there. And it says, a picture of impending desolation of Moab. Moab helped Nebuchadnezzar against Judah, but later was devastated at his hands. You see, you make an alliance with somebody that's bigger than you, and he decides he doesn't need you anymore, so he's going to wipe you out too. This is talking about 582 BC, in the timeline. It says, for centuries the land was lain desolate and sparsely inhabited, the ruins of its many cities testifying to its ancient populousness. Its restoration, verse 47, that of Ammon in 49:6, may have been fulfilled in their absorption into the general Arab race, some of whom were present at Pentecost when the gospel was first proclaimed to the world, Acts chapter 2, verse 11. Or it may mean that the land will yet again be prosperous. Other prophecies about Moab are in Isaiah and Ezekiel and Amos and Zephaniah. Sake of time, we've got to move on fast here beyond this. Jeremiah 48:1, against Moab, thus saith the Lord of hosts, the God of Israel, woe unto Nebo, for it is spoiled. Kiriathim is confounded and taken. Mizgab is confounded and dismayed. Verse 8, and the spoiler shall come upon every city, and no city shall escape. The valley also shall perish, and the plan shall be destroyed, as the Lord has spoken. This is kind of starting to sound like Sherman's March to the Sea in our own Civil War, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, to destroy everything and everybody.
Right.
Okay. Verse 29, chapter 48, verse 29 says, we have heard the pride of Moab. He is exceeding proud of his loftiness and his arrogancy and his pride and the haughtiness of his heart. And verse 42, and Moab shall be destroyed from being a people, because he hath magnified himself against the Lord. Verse 47, yet will I bring again the captivity of Moab in the latter days, saith the Lord. Thus far is the judgment of Moab. We go to chapter 49. And Hallease just made a short comment here, speaking of the countries of Ammon, Edom, Syria, Hazor, and Elam. I don't know if you remember those from our study of the maps, but they're all these countries. Syria is way up north. That's as far north as we've gone so far. But if you're looking at those maps, it's way up north of where we were. Edom was down there around Philistia and in Judah, in that area. This is a prediction that Nebuchadnezzar would conquer these nations, which he did. In verse 2, he says, therefore, behold, the days come, saith the Lord, that I will cause an alarm of war to be heard and Rabbah of the Ammonites, and it shall be a desolate heap, and her daughters shall be burned with fire. Then shall Israel be heir unto them that were his heirs, saith the Lord. Verse 5, Behold, I will bring a fear upon thee, saith the Lord God of hosts, from all those that be about thee, and shall be driven out every man right forth, and none shall gather up him that wandereth. Verse 6, And afterward I will bring again the captivity of the children of Ammon, saith the Lord. Concerning Edom, thus saith the Lord of hosts, Is wisdom no more in Teman? Is counsel perished from the prudent? Is their wisdom vanished? Verse 16, Thy terribleness hath deceived thee, and the pride of thine heart, O thou that dwellest in the clefts of the rock, that holdest the height of the hill. Though thou shouldest make thy nest as high as an eagle, I will bring thee down from thence, saith the Lord. Also Edom shall be desolation. Every one that goeth by it shall be astonished, and shall hiss at the plagues thereof. Verse 27, And I will kindle a fire in the wall of Damascus, and it shall consume the palaces of Ben-Hadad. Wow, that's quite a sweep, isn't it? 28, concerning Kedar, and concerning the kingdoms of Hazor, and which Nebuchadnezzar king of Babylon shall smite. Thus saith the Lord, Arise ye, go up to Kedar, and spoil the men of the east. Verse 33, And Hazor will be a dwelling for dragons, and a desolation forever. Shall there be no man abide here, or any son of man dwell in it. It says, the only thing that will be left over there is the mice and the lizards. That's basically what he's saying. Verse 38, And I will set my throne in Elam, and will destroy from thence the king and the princes, saith the Lord. Verse 39, It shall come to pass in the latter days that I will bring again the captivity of Elam, saith the Lord. Chapters 50 and 51, how he groups these together. It says, prediction of the fall of Babylon. This is interesting. Now, we've seen Israel fall, we've seen Judah fall, we've seen all these other countries fall. Now it says the prediction of the fall of Babylon. Okay, we keep hearing this name so many times. Well, where's Babylon? Well, that's way up over Mesopotamia, over by the Gulf of Arabia. All right. It says the fall of perpetual desolation of Babylon is here predicted in language matching the grandeur of the theme in verses 51, 37 through 43, as Isaiah has done earlier in 13, verses 17 through 22. It says the Medes, leading a great company of nations, are named as the conquerors. These two chapters pronouncing the doom of Babylon were copied in a separate book and sent to Babylon in a deputation headed by King Zedekiah 7 years before Nebuchadnezzar burned Jerusalem. The book was to be read publicly and then in solemn ceremony sunk in the Euphrates with these words, Thus shall Babylon sink and not rise. Interesting that they were warned, weren't they? Chapter 50, verse 9, he says, For lo, I will raise and cause to come up against Babylon an assembly of great nations from the north country, and they shall set themselves in array against her. From thence she shall be taken. Their arrows shall be as of a mighty expert man. None shall return in vain. Verse 20, In those days and in that time, saith the Lord, the iniquity of Israel shall be sought for, and there shall be none, and the sins of Judah, and they shall not be found, for I will pardon them whom I reserve. Verse 45, Therefore hear ye the counsel of the Lord, that he hath taken against Babylon, and his purposes that he hath purposed against the land of Chaldeans. Surely the least of the flock shall draw them out. Surely he shall make their habitation desolate with them. Verse 51, verse 5 says, For Israel hath not been forsaken, nor Judah of his God, of the Lord of hosts, though their land was filled with sin against the Holy One of Israel. Verse 11 says, Make bright the arrows, gather the shields. The Lord hath raised up the spirit of the kings of the Medes, for his device is against Babylon, to destroy it, because it was the vengeance of the Lord, the vengeance of his temple. Medes were a tribe of people up there in the area that was called Assyria. Okay, and they gathered together all these people of the other countries. They're sick and tired of this Babylon pushing everybody around. So they're getting up an army to go after him for his devices against Babylon to destroy it. Okay, verse 29. And the land shall tremble in sorrow, for every purpose of the Lord shall be performed against Babylon to make the land of Babylon a desolation without an inhabitant. Now remember, God said he was going to clean this place up. He's going to kill off those people. And verse 59 says, the word which Jeremiah the prophet commanded Seraiah the son of Neriah, the son of Maaseiah, when he went to Zedekiah the king of Judah into Babylon in the 4th year of his reign, and this Seraiah was a quiet prince. Verse 60, so Jeremiah wrote in a book all the evil that should come upon Babylon, even all these words that are written against Babylon. Verse 63, and it shall be, when thou hast made an end to reading this book, that thou shalt bind a stone to it and cast it in the midst of Euphrates. And thou shalt say, thus shall Babylon sink, and shall not rise from the evil that I will bring upon her, and they shall be weary. Thus far are the words of Jeremiah. Pardon me. We get chapter 52, and Halley's gives us a timeline here, and you might want to compare this with the timeline that you see in your book. The years may not be an exact match, but we go back to year 734 to 721 BC. That was when Assyria took Israel away in captivity. Okay. Then in 606 BC, Nebuchadnezzar conquered Jehoiakim and took temple treasures, seed royal, including Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
There you go.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
That may just be what I need here. Pardon me for just a second. Keep going 100 miles an hour here. Maybe more. Okay. Jehoiakim was 25 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem, and he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord his God. In 2 Chronicles 36, Against him came up Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, and bound him in fetters to carry him to Babylon. 36 verse 7, Nebuchadnezzar also carried of the vessels of the house of the Lord to Babylon, and put them in his temple at Babylon. So you don't always get all the whole story in one book. So we're going back to 2 Chronicles now. We're picking up some details that other people added after all this had happened. Because you can imagine being a single prophet. You don't see everything. You see a lot of it, but somebody else sees some more of it.
Yeah.
And this is what we're going to see as we go into Ezekiel. We're going to see Ezekiel kind of overlaps a lot of what we've already seen here in Jeremiah, plus a number of other things because he had different kinds of visions. But Daniel 1:3. And the king spake unto Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel and the king's seed and of the princes. See, we didn't really see this exact detail in Jeremiah, but we go to Daniel and we can find this. And of course, we're going to study Daniel after Ezekiel, so we'll hear this again. But Daniel 1, that was 1:3, and Daniel 1:6 says, now among these were of the children of Judah, Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. That's Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and Daniel. Okay. Then in 597 BC, Zedekiah was the last king of Judah. Nebuchadnezzar came again and took the rest of the treasures, and King Jehoiakim and 10,000 of the princes, officers, and chief men carried them to Babylon. 2 Kings 24:15, and he carried away Jehoiakim to Babylon, and the king's mother, and the king's wives, and his officers, and the mighty of the land. Those carried he into captivity from Jerusalem to Babylon. And then, and all the men of might, even 7,000, and craftsmen and smiths 1,000, all that were strong and apt for war, even them the king of Babylon brought captive to Babylon. And the king of Babylon made Mattaniah, his father's brother, king in his stead, and changed his name to Zedekiah. 586, the Babylonians came again and burned Jerusalem, broke down its walls, put out the eyes of King Zedekiah, and carried him in chains to Babylon with 832 captives, leaving only a remnant of the poorest class of people in the land. And burned the house of the Lord and the king's house and all the houses of Jerusalem and all the houses of the great men burned he with fire. And in 581, 5 years after the burning of Jerusalem, the Babylonians came and took 745 more captives, even after a considerable group, including Jeremiah, had fled to Egypt. Okay, ready for the book of Lamentations. It's going to be a fast trip through Lamentations. Okay.
Good thing all the chapters were very short.
Not a happy book. So.
Yeah. Lamentations is also known as the Lamentations of Jeremiah. It is written by Jeremiah. Okay. And comments from Hallie says this book must have been composed in the 3 months between the burning of Jerusalem and the departure of the remnant to Egypt, during which the seat of government was at Mizpah. Okay. That probably that time that Jeremiah was in prison. Okay. Lamentations 1:1. How doth the city sit solitary that was full of people? How is she become as a widow? She that is great among the nations and princes among the provinces, how is she become a tributary? Lamentations 1:2. She weepeth sore in the night, and her tears are on her cheeks. Among all her lovers she hath none to comfort her. All her friends have dealt treacherously with her. They are become her enemies. Speaking of Jerusalem. Okay. You move up to verse number 21. It says, they have heard that I sigh. There is none to comfort me. All mine enemies have heard of my trouble. They are glad that thou hast done it. That thou wilt bring the day that thou hast called, and they shall be like unto me. Let all their wickedness come before thee, and do unto them as thou hast done unto me. For all my transgressions, for my sighs are many, and my heart is faint. A comment from John Darby here. He says, there is nothing more affecting than the sentiments produced in the heart by the conviction that the subject of affliction is beloved of God, that he loves that which he is obliged to smite, and is obliged to smite that which he loves. The prophet, while laying open the affliction of Jerusalem, acknowledges that the sin of the people had caused it. Could that diminish the sorrow of his heart? If on the one hand it was a consolation, on the other it humbled and made him hide his face. The pride of the enemy and their joy in seeing the affliction of the beloved of God give occasion to sue for compassion on behalf of the afflicted and the judgment of the malice of the enemy. At the end of chapter 1, after full confession that it was Judah's sin that had brought the evil upon them, and that Jehovah was righteous, the people call on the eye of Jehovah to look on their sorrow and judge those whose wickedness they were punished. Chapter 2, verse 2, he says, the Lord hath swallowed up all the habitations of Jacob, and hath not pitied. He hath thrown down his wrath, the strongholds of the daughter of Judah. He hath brought them down to the ground. He hath polluted the kingdom and the princes thereof. Verse 6, and he hath violently taken away his temple, as if it were a garden. He hath destroyed his places of the assembly. The Lord hath caused the solemn feasts and Sabbaths to be forgotten in Zion, and hath despised in the indignation of his anger the king and the priest. Verse 17, the Lord hath done that which he had devised. He hath fulfilled his word that he had commanded in the days of old. He hath thrown down, he hath not pitied, and he hath caused thine enemies to rejoice over thee. He hath set up the horn of thine adversaries. Verse 22, thou hast called as in a solemn day my terrors round about, so that in the day of the Lord's anger none escaped nor remained. Those that I have swaddled and brought up hath mine enemy consumed. Darby's comments on chapter 2, he says the second chapter is a very deep and touching appeal The desolation of Jerusalem is looked at as Jehovah's own work on what was his own and not that of the enemy. Never had there been such sorrow. Not only had he polluted the kingdom and its princes, and had there been such sorrow, not only had he polluted the kingdom and its princes, and had been as an enemy against Jerusalem and all that was goodly in it, but he had cast down his altar, abhorred his sanctuary. He no longer respected what he himself had set up. Only we must remember that it was when the relationships of Jehovah and his people depended, however long, God's patience on the faithfulness of the people's obedience to Jehovah on the old covenant. But this consideration gives room for appealing to himself. Still, it is a solemn thing when Jehovah is forced to reject that which he acknowledges to be his own. But it must be so if the association of his name is only a means of falsifying the testimony of what he is. And this brings before us the amazing important principle contained in the ministry of Jeremiah, not merely the substitution of Babylon and the Gentile empire for Jerusalem and God's government in Israel, but the setting this last aside in itself, the ground of God's relationship with man, where it subsisted as that which could not subsist when put to the test. Comment in chapter 3 on Jeremiah's grief. It says, in this chapter, Jeremiah seems to be complaining that God had ignored him and his prayers. And verse number 8 says, also when I cry and shout, he shutteth out my prayer. God had covered himself with a cloud that my prayer could not pass, that no prayer could pass through. He's feeling pretty sorry about this time, isn't he? Mm-hmm. Lamentations 3 verse 44, he says, thou hast covered thyself with a cloud that our prayer should not pass through. Though complaining, he justifies God, acknowledging that they deserved worse. In verse 22, it is of the Lord's mercies that we are not consumed, because his compassions fail not. The high point of the book is 21 through 39. If we go to verse 26, he says, it is good that a man should both hope and quietly wait for the salvation of the Lord. This is what Jeremiah had hoped for all along, wasn't it? And it didn't happen. Verse 31, it says, for the Lord will not cast off forever. Verse 48, mine eye runneth down with rivers of water for the destruction of the daughter of my people. Verse 56, thou hast heard my voice, hide not thine ear at my breathing, at my cry. Verse 60, thou hast seen all their vengeance and all their imaginations against me. Verse 66, persecute and destroy them in anger from under the heavens of the Lord. He's saying, go ahead and kill them off, God. Chapter 4, verse 4, he says, the tongue of the sucking child cleaveth to the roof of his mouth for thirst. The young child asketh bread, and no man breaketh unto him. Okay, we're talking about how the children are in the streets of Jerusalem now. Okay, after the captivity has taken place. These are the few that remain behind. Verse 10, the hands of the pitiful women have sodden their own children. You know what that means? They're boiling them in pots and eating them. Yeah, sodden means boiled. Okay? They were their meat in the destruction of the daughter of my people. Lamentations 4:11, the Lord hath accomplished his fury, he hath poured out his fierce anger, and hath kindled a fire in Zion, and hath devoured the foundations thereof. Verse 22, the punishment of thine iniquity is accomplished, O daughter of Zion. He will no more carry thee away into captivity. He will visit thine iniquity. O daughter of Edom, he will discover thy sins. You know, O daughter of Edom, where Edom was? Mm-hmm. It's that territory out around Jerusalem over until you got over into Philistia, over on the west side of them. Okay. John Darby made this comment, says, Jeremiah, having now found Jehovah in the affliction, tranquilly measures its whole extent. But this is itself a consolation. For after all, Jehovah, who changes not, is there to comfort the heart. This is chapter 4. He calls the whole to mind and contrasts that which Jerusalem was. when under the blessing of Jehovah, with that which his anger has produced. It is no longer only the overwhelming circumstances of the present scene, but what it was before God. The Nazarites passed before his thoughts that which Jerusalem as the city of the great king had been even in the eyes of her enemies, the anointed of Jehovah, under whose shadow the people might have lived, as we have already seen, although the Gentiles ruled. The anointed of Jehovah had been taken in their pits like the prey of the hunter. But the afflicted spirit of God's servant, who bears the burden of his people, can now estimate not only the affliction that overwhelms them, but the position of the enemies of Jerusalem and that of the beloved city. Nay, he who would have one run to and fro through the streets of Jerusalem to find a just one, now sees the enemies have slain the just in her midst. And he says, the cup of God's wrath shall pass through unto Edom, who was rejoicing in the ruin of the city of Jehovah. And as to Zion, she has doubtless drunk this cup to the dregs, but if she has done so, it was in order that she might drink of it no more. The punishment of her iniquity is accomplished. She shall no more be carried into captivity. All was finished for her. She had drunk the cup which she had confessed she deserved. And it says, but the sin of haughty Edom should be laid bare. God would visit her iniquity. Verse 11 says, the Lord hath accomplished his fury, he hath poured out his fierce anger, hath kindled a fire in Zion, it shall be devoured, and it hath devoured the foundations thereof. Verse number 18, the Lord is righteous, for I have rebelled against his commandment. Hear, I pray you, all people, and behold my sorrow. My virgins, my young men are gone into captivity. I have called for my lovers, but they deceived me. My priests and mine elders gave up the ghost in the city while they sought their meat to relieve their souls. Lamentations 1:20 said, behold, O Lord, for I am in distress. My bowels are troubled. My heart is turned within me. For I have grievously rebelled. Abroad the sword bereaveth. At home there is as death. Chapter 5, Lamentations 5:1, remember, O Lord, what has come upon us. Consider and behold our reproach. Verse 14, the elders have ceased from the gate, the young men from their music. Verse 15, the joy of our heart has ceased. Our dance is turned into mourning. Verse 21, turn thou us unto thee, O Lord, and we shall be turned. Renew our days as of old. He's going to have to hold his horses. Go ahead, a couple more paragraphs.
That's fine.
But thou hast, verse 22, thou hast utterly rejected us. Thou art very wroth against us. And Halley concludes our story with this, our study. It says, enumerated and summarized, Jeremiah could not keep his mind off the horrors of the siege, cries of the starving children, women boiling their babies for food. Howbeit, in spite of its horrible sufferings, Jerusalem failed to learn its lesson. After the captivity, it was rebuilt, and in Jesus' day had again become a powerful city, and climaxed its sin by crucifying the Son of God. Then followed its eradication by the armies of Rome in AD 70. The Jewish wars and revolt against Rome began in AD 66. Titus, with his Roman army, arrived before the walls of Jerusalem on the day of Passover, AD 70. Banks of earthwork were built, battering rams were placed, and the siege began. The Roman army numbered 30,000, the Jewish army 24,000. The city was crowded with 600,000 visitors, according to Tacitus. After 5 months, the walls were battered down, the temple burned, and the city left ruined and desolate, except Herod's 3 great towers at the northwest corner, which were left standing as a memorial of the massive strength of the fortifications which Titus had demolished. So there you've seen all the destruction of Jerusalem. We're done, Doc. Thank you.
No.
Thank you for your attendance and your attention.
All right. Thank you for the course. Sure.